Hi, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Cliff Kincaid. In his 1995 book, Dreams from My Father, Barack Obama never discussed the identity of the mysterious Frank, who had given him important advice on growing up black in what he called a white racist world. We learned in 2008 that Frank was actually Frank Marshall Davis, a member of the Communist Party who was the subject of a 600-page FBI file. Still, the major media never asked Obama about this important relationship during his growing up years in Hawaii. Now, in an extraordinary development, film of Obama explicitly and openly identifying Frank as Frank Marshall Davis has suddenly surfaced on the internet. It's described as having been recorded on September 20th, 1995, with the program originally airing on Channel 37, Cambridge Municipal Television, as an episode of the show The Author Series. It's not clear how many saw this original program when it aired. For some reason, this, quote, from the vault Barack Obama presentation was just recently posted on YouTube. Obama is introduced as a Harvard Law School student and president of the Harvard Law Review. Now, in his remarks, Obama never identifies Davis as a communist or even a leftist, but the remarks do reflect the significant influence that Davis had over his young life as Obama was growing up in Hawaii. In the excerpt that we're posting here, Obama talks about how Davis, quote, schools him on the subject of race relations. The term implies a teacher-student relationship the two of them had, confirming what we had reported back in 2008, namely that Davis had functioned as Obama's mentor. We will post that excerpt now so you can watch and listen to it, and then return to discuss the background and the context of what you've seen.
And the passage finally ends with me having a conversation with a close friend of my maternal grandfather, a close friend of Gramps, a black man from Kansas named Frank, actually at the time a fairly well-known poet named Frank Marshall Davis, who had moved to Hawaii and lived there. And so I have a discussion with him about the kinds of frustrations I'm having, and he sort of schools me on that I should get used to these frustrations. So let me dig in.
Let's understand what he's saying here. As he's getting ready to read directly from the book, Dreams from My Father, Obama talks about the passages ending with, quote, me having a conversation with a close friend of my maternal grandfather, a close friend of Gramps, a black man from Kansas named Frank. Actually, at the time, a fairly well-known poet named Frank Marshall Davis, who had moved to Hawaii and lived there. And so I have a discussion with him about the kinds of frustrations I'm having. And he sort of schools me that I should get used to these frustrations. End of quote. Well, Frank Marshall Davis was indeed a black poet. His works included attacks on Christianity. One Davis poem referred to Christ irreverently as the N-word. Davis was himself an atheist. However, Frank Marshall Davis was more well known as a communist propagandist whose work for the Communist Party in Hawaii had earned him surveillance by the FBI and placement on its security index. Davis was also a pornographer who engaged in bizarre sexual activities and practices, even pedophilia. So needless to say, Obama's willingness to identify Frank as Davis before this audience raises questions as to why he wasn't identified by his full name, Frank Marshall Davis, in the book itself. Obama made references to, quote, Frank 22 times in that book. Professor Paul Kengor notes that Obama's audio version of Dreams from My Father omitted every reference to Frank that was in the book. That was clearly designed to keep people from asking questions about, quote, Frank, as Obama was considering a run for the presidency. Now, today in 2015, film of Obama identifying Frank as Davis is indeed confirmation of the obvious. It doesn't make a lot of difference now politically, since Obama is serving out the rest of his second term. But it could have made a difference 7 years ago in 2008 when we had identified Frank as Frank Marshall Davis and Obama was running for his first term. This clip of Obama talking about Davis during this 1995 Cambridge presentation is important for other reasons, however. By his own admission, Obama was preoccupied with his own feelings and thoughts about race relations. He's an angry young man, he says, whose father was absent from his life. He says he was without father figures around who might guide and steer my anger. And that's a quote. Well, that's significant because it's clear from the passages he reads that Davis became that father figure, in effect, a mentor. Davis was indeed picked by his white grandfather to be a role model or a father figure or a mentor for a young Barack Obama. Yet, the Washington Post, the fact checker there, recently claimed that it was a lie to suggest that Davis had any significant influence over Obama as he was growing up in Hawaii. Now, for that story, please watch our video entitled Marxist Mole, The Story They Can't Kill. In the passages Obama reads back in this 1995 video, Obama discusses inviting some white friends to a black party and seeing them squirm. Quote, and this is Obama, "They're trying to tap their foot to the beat and being extraordinarily friendly," Obama says about them. They're trying to fit in, but clearly, according to Obama, they're uncomfortable. And they tell Obama that they just want to leave. Obama's conclusion is this, quote, "What I have to put up with every day of my life is something that they find so objectionable that they can't even put up with a day," unquote. This is like a revelation to Obama about the world of white racism. All of this, he says, triggers something in his head, and he comprehends what he calls a new map of the world. He gets a sense of anger and betrayal in society and even in his own family, in which he's being raised by his white grandfather, Gramps, and white grandmother, who he calls Toot. This leads to his decision to go see Frank for advice. He says, Frank Marshall Davis then, quote, "sort of schools me that I should get used to these frustrations," unquote, Obama says. Actually, in fact, Davis says much more than that. The passages that he reads from the book before the Cambridge Library audience include a discussion of when his own white grandmother was accosted by a black panhandler. Davis told Obama that his grandmother was right to be scared and that, quote, "she understands that black people have reason to hate," unquote. In other words, Davis did not encourage Obama to pursue racial harmony or racial reconciliation. No, instead, he tells Obama that blacks have a reason or even a right to hate. Now, it's significant that back in that time, 1995, when he made those comments and read those passages, Obama decides to read those specific lines from the book on race relations. They clearly reflect what Obama is all about, what's going through his mind. And it's also clear to us from reading the book and understanding what Frank Marshall Davis was all about. In fact, we wrote a column back in 2012 that was titled "Reason to Hate: Barack Obama's Racist Roots." Now, in that column, we note that Paul Kengor's book on Davis, and the title of that was "The Communist: Frank Marshall Davis, The Untold Story of Barack Obama's Mentor," examined the Frank Marshall Davis mentality and his ideology, which shaped Obama in significant detail. Paul Kengor's book documented that Davis, and I'm going to go through a list here. Number one, Davis considered American racism a disease that Red Russia had solved, that the communists in the Soviet Union had solved. Davis wrote in a column on July 20th, 1946, that the Soviet Union had, in less than a generation, abolished discrimination and racism. Davis wrote that the only people Winston Churchill cared about were, quote, the white people of the British Empire. Davis had labeled the Marshall Plan for Western Europe after World War II a form of white imperialism designed to, quote, help maintain European empires at the expense of exploited dark colonial peoples. Davis had also considered anti-communism itself a form of racism. So when Obama says that Davis's remarks about blacks having a reason to hate, he's saying that those remarks had a profound impact on him, on Obama himself. In fact, these are the quotes from Obama, quote, in the book, "The earth shook under my feet, ready to crack open at any moment," he said. "I stopped, trying to steady myself, and know for the first time that I was utterly alone." Utterly alone against what? Against white racism. In his talk at the Cambridge Public Library, Obama does say some nice things about white people. He faults America for not making a serious effort to address racial problems, but says, quote, Americans are decent people. And he comments that some things have changed for the better. But you can still sense in these passages and in how Obama talks about it and his exchanges and relationship with Frank Marshall Davis that the racial anger is still there inside Obama. Now, looking back at this presentation before the Cambridge Public Library, and then taking into account the policies of the Obama administration, we believe there can be no doubt that Davis's racism did have a profound impact on Barack Obama. As we wrote back in 2012, after examining the racist outlook of Frank Marshall Davis, quote, "The Obama administration's tactics are to exploit and manipulate racial and ethnic differences for political gain. This is not an accident, but a deliberate political strategy that one can find in the mind of Obama's communist mentor, Frank Marshall Davis, who educated Obama during his critical growing up years in Hawaii. Remember, black people, Davis told Obama, have reason to hate. And we believe the evidence shows that Obama has incorporated that hatred in his policies and pronouncements. Now that we have Barack Obama's belated personal confirmation of the critical role of Frank Marshall Davis in formulating his own racial outlook on the world, perhaps the Washington Post will admit that those of us who warned about Davis's influence on Obama were right, but we doubt it. The Post will never admit that it missed this significant story, and that Davis did have a significant impact on a future president. It's also time for the media, we believe, to finally take a look at how Frank Marshall Davis's communism had an impact on Obama as well as his anti-white racism. Perhaps indeed racism was the hook that got Obama into the Marxist movement. Like Davis, it looks like Obama does see Marxism as the answer or solution to white racism. And that explains why the true identity of Frank was concealed as Barack Obama ran for the presidency. Thanks for watching.